The cold air hit my face, sharp and unforgiving, the way mountain air does just before dawn. It wasn't the familiar kiss of home, of pine and snow and inherited peace. This air tasted like ash, like metal. It seeped into my lungs and clawed at my throat. I stood on the edge of something that felt like a grave, the kind dug by someone you trusted with your life. The chalet stood silent on the rise, dark windows staring back like empty eyes. It wasn't mine anymore. Not legally. Not to him, anyway. He'd sold it. The wood that smelled of generations, the stone hearth where we'd all gathered, the view that held my childhood sunsets, gone. Exchanged for paper. Signed away while I packed a suitcase for a trip he insisted I take, a trip that felt like a cage now. The betrayal wasn't just the sale. It was the calculated excision of my history, my family's heart, from our shared future. And the chill wasn't just the mountain. It was the space opening up inside me, vast and frozen. A single, sharp crack echoed somewhere on the slopes. Or maybe it was inside my chest. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the ash and the metal taste, there was the wood smoke and the scent of old beeswax polish. There was the murmur of my grandmother's stories by the fire, the scrape of skis on fresh snow outside the window, the quiet rhythm of generations living and breathing in the same space. This wasn't just a building, it was the anchor of my family. Every summer, every winter, it pulled us back. My parents, their siblings, the cousins, then us, the next wave. It was where I learned to ski, learned to fall, learned to get back up. It was where I saw my breath turn to clouds that danced in the sunlight reflecting off the snow. It was where I felt truly known, truly rooted. And then there was Mark. He came into my life like a sudden, bright light. Charming, ambitious, quick to laugh. He saw the mountain, the chalet, and seemed to understand its pull. He loved the idea of it, the prestige, the beauty. He'd wrap an arm around me on the deck, looking out at the peaks, and talk about bringing our children here, about making new memories on top of the old. He fit in, or so I thought. He charmed my family, talked business with my father, listened intently to my grandmother's tales, though I sometimes caught a flicker of impatience in his eyes when the conversation drifted too far from tangible things like markets and deals. He was driven, relentless in his work, building his own success from the ground up. I admired that. I trusted that drive, saw it as a force for us, for our shared future. My desire was simple: build a life grounded in the love, stability, and legacy I'd grown up with, a life where places like the chalet weren't just assets, but living parts of the story. Mark said he wanted the same. We bought a house, not grand, but solid. We talked about starting a family. The chalet was our escape, our constant. We spent weekends there, just the two of us, the quiet settling around us like a blanket. I watched him sometimes, staring out at the slopes, a strange intensity in his gaze. I thought it was awe. I thought it was peace. I was wrong. He started taking more calls at the chalet. Long, hushed conversations that would cut short when I entered the room. He'd brush it off. Just work. A sensitive deal. His moods became more volatile. Highs of almost manic energy followed by sudden, withdrawn silences. He was building something, he said. A big play. Something that would change everything. I didn't understand the specifics of his financial world, the jargon, the complex structures he navigated. I trusted him to navigate it for us. He handled the finances, the bills, the investments. It made sense. It was his expertise. I focused on my own work, on building a home, on planning our future together. The chalet paperwork, the ownership structure, it was all tied up in my family's trust, a complex entity managed by a board of trustees, mostly older cousins and my father's generation, set up decades ago to protect the family's core assets. The chalet plot itself was technically owned by a specific branch of the trust, designated for my line. It wasn't something you just sold. It was insulated, protected. Or so I thought. The official letter arrived on a Tuesday. A registered letter. The kind that feels heavy with bad news even before you open it. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Mark. I signed for it, a mundane act that became the hinge of everything. He was out of town, on one of his increasingly frequent business trips. The envelope sat on the counter, an ominous white rectangle. Curiosity, a prickle of unease I couldn't place, made me open it. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. The language was formal, dense with legal terms. My eyes scanned the page, looking for a name, a clue.
Then I saw it.
Our address. The chalet's address. And the word, sale. The air left my lungs like someone had punched me. Sale? What sale? The house? No. It listed the property description, the specific parcel number for the chalet, and its land. It detailed the transfer of ownership, the closing date, which was 2 weeks ago. The signatories. Mark's name. And another name. A company name. A shell corporation I would learn later. My hands shook so violently, I dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, innocent-looking, but carrying the weight of an atom bomb. He sold it. He sold the chalet.
How?
It was trust property. It wasn't his to sell. The phone felt alien in my hand. I called the trust lawyers first. Their initial reaction was confusion. The chalet wasn't for sale. It couldn't be sold without the express permission of the trustees, a process that took months, sometimes years, of meetings and approvals. There had been no such process. Then silence on the line. A hurried shuffling of papers. More silence. The lawyer's voice, when he returned, was strained. "Mrs. my last name," he said, using my married name, which suddenly felt like a costume. "There appears to have been a transaction." He sounded like he was talking about a rogue teetal, not a piece of property that held the soul of my family. He confirmed it. The sale had gone through. On paper. He couldn't explain how. There had to be a forged signature, a loophole, something illegal. He promised to investigate. I didn't wait. I called Mark. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called his office. His assistant said he was in meetings all day. I called his private line, the one he only gave me. Ring, ring, ring. Voicemail. A cold dread started to pool in my stomach, spreading outwards like a stain. It wasn't just a mistake. This felt deliberate. When he finally called back, hours later, his voice was too casual. "Hey, Mr. Calls. Everything okay?" I couldn't keep the tremor out of my voice. "The chalet, Mark. What did you do?" A beat of silence. A calculated beat. Then a sigh.
"Oh, that."
"Look, we need to talk." "Talk? You sold it. How could you?" "It wasn't yours." It was complicated. A necessary business move. His tone was flat, dismissive, as if I was complaining about a delayed flight. Necessary? To sell my family's property? The trust, they didn't authorize it. Technicalities, he said, the word dripping with contempt. I handled the technicalities. "Look, it's done. The money is already reinvested." Reinvested. The word hung in the air, a greasy cloud. What did he mean, reinvested? He wasn't a trustee. He had no right to sell assets held by the trust, much less reinvest the proceeds. Something was deeply wrong. "Mark, tell me what's going on. Why did you sell it?" Another sigh. Louder this time, conveying exasperation. It was holding us back. Tied up capital. I needed liquidity for this big play I told you about. This is going to make us fortunes. More than that old house ever could. My head reeled. Fortunes? Us? He spoke as if he'd done this for us, for our shared future. But he'd acted in secret.
"Cut me out. Cut my family out."
And he called the chalet an old house. The contempt in his voice was a physical blow. It wasn't just an old house, Mark. It was everything. My voice was barely a whisper. "Sentimental nonsense," he snapped. The mask dropped for a second, revealing something sharp and ugly underneath. "This is business. Real money. You wouldn't understand." That was the real betrayal. Not just the sale, but the revelation that he saw my love for the chalet, my connection to my family's history, as sentimental nonsense, that he thought I was incapable of understanding real money. He saw me as naive, Irrelevant to the big play, the conversation ended quickly after that, a blur of his justifications and my stunned disbelief. He promised to explain everything when he got back. The promise felt hollow, coated in lies. The early struggles were internal. A war fought in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. How did he do it? The trust lawyers were frantic, poring over documents, talking about fraud, about legal action. My family was shocked, then furious. My father, usually a man of quiet strength, was incandescent. How dare he touch family property? How dare he betray me like this? They rallied around me, their anger a protective shield, but also a constant reminder of the enormity of what he had done. Mark returned, smooth and evasive. He spun a story about a complex financial maneuver, a temporary transfer of ownership that went awry, a misunderstanding. It was full of holes, legal jargon twisted into a narrative of unfortunate accident. But I saw the calculated coolness in his eyes. He wasn't trying to explain, he was trying to manage. Manage me, manage the fallout. He acted like I was the one overreacting. It's just property, darling. We'll buy something else. Something bigger, better. He didn't understand.
He refused to understand.
My initial attempts to understand were colored by the lingering hope that the man I married was still in there somewhere, trapped by circumstance or bad judgment. Maybe he was in over his head. Maybe he panicked. I tried to reach him, the old him. I talked about the memories, the pain of losing the chalet. He listened, or pretended to, but his eyes were already elsewhere, calculating the next move. The rising challenges came in waves. The legal battle with the trust began. Not against Mark initially, but against the shell corporation that had bought the property. The lawyers for that corporation were ruthless, aggressive. They argued the sale was legitimate, fully executed. It became clear this wasn't a simple error. It was a deliberate, complex plot. And Mark was at the center of it. He wasn't just caught in something. He orchestrated it. Then came the whispers. First subtle, then bolder. My friends, acquaintances, people in our shared social circle. Questions about Mark's business dealings. Rumors. And then the mistress. Her name was Sarah. She owned a small, struggling hair salon downtown. The whispers said Mark was seen with her, often. That he was investing in her business. A significant investment. The connection clicked into place with sickening certainty. The liquidity he needed. The big play, it wasn't about fortunes for us. It was about fortunes for him. And her. He hadn't sold my family's heritage for his business. He'd sold it for her business. The chalet money, the money rooted in my family's generations of hard work and stewardship, was being used to fund his mistress's salon. The humiliation was a physical sensation. It crawled over my skin, hot and shameful. Not just the betrayal of the marriage, but the specific, targeted nature of it. He hadn't just stolen. He defiled something sacred to me and used it to build a new life with someone else. The sheer audacity, the cruelty of it, was breathtaking. I confronted him again. This time, the hope was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Sarah, I said, watching his face carefully. His eyes flickered, just for a second. The carefully constructed mask wavered. I don't know what you're talking about. His voice was flat, but too quick. The salon, Mark. Her salon. You used the chalet money to buy her a salon, didn't you? He didn't answer immediately. He looked away, fiddling with his watch. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, laced with defiance. She needed help. A fresh start. And my family's history was the price. It was just money, he said again, that dismissive wave of the hand that made my blood boil. And yes, it was tied up. This was the cleanest way. Cleanest way to steal from your wife and her family? He finally looked at me, his eyes hard. I didn't steal. I made a transaction. A smart one. And don't act like you or your family need that money. You have plenty. That was it. The justification. Our family had money, so it wasn't really stealing. It was just reallocating resources. My resources. resources he felt entitled to. The conversation escalated, words turning into weapons. He accused me of being overly emotional, of being stuck in the past, of not appreciating his financial genius. I accused him of being a thief and a liar. The air grew thick with unspoken cruelties, with the death of everything we thought we had built. The midpoint shift wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a slow, glacial change within me. The grief began to recede, replaced by a simmering, then burning, anger. The helplessness I initially felt morphed into a fierce determination. I stopped asking why and started asking how. How had he legally sold trust property? How could I stop him? How could I reclaim what was lost? The trust lawyers explained the loophole he'd exploited. A complex series of transfers, leveraging obscure clauses, maybe even some questionable filings, all executed under the radar. It was audacious, intricate, and deeply illegal. But proving it would take time, money, and expose the trust to potential complications. There was talk of settlement, of trying to recover the value of the chalet, if not the property itself. But the value wasn't the point. The place was the point. The mountain. The history. I sat in endless meetings with the trustees. Elderly cousins, sharp-eyed lawyers, my father, his face etched with worry and anger. They discussed strategies, risks, the optics of a major legal battle. There was a weariness in their voices. They had spent decades protecting the family legacy, navigating complex legal and financial landscapes. This felt like a frontal assault, a vulgar, personal violation of everything they stood for. I felt a profound disconnection in those meetings. They talked about assets, liabilities, precedents. I talked about the smell of pine needles after a rain shower, the way the light hit the peaks at sunset, the sound of my grandmother's laugh echoing in the main room. They were fighting a legal battle. I was fighting for my soul. One evening, I drove up to the mountain. I parked further down the access road, where the private property signs hadn't yet gone up, where the air still smelled familiar. I walked the edge of the property line, looking up at the dark chalet. Strangers owned it now, or a shell corporation did. The thought was a physical pain. But as I stood there, the familiar contours of the mountain rising around me, something shifted. It wasn't just the chalet.
It was the whole damn mountain.
The ski runs winding down like scars on its face, the lifts hanging silent against the twilight sky, the cluster of hotels and restaurants at the base. This was my family's mountain. Not literally. The resort itself was a separate entity, owned by a large corporation. But the spirit of the place, the history, the community tied to it, that was ours. Mark had taken a piece. A vital, personal piece. But the mountain was still there. Vast, enduring, indifferent to the petty dramas of humans. And in that moment, standing in the cold, smelling the coming snow, I realized that fighting for the chalet alone felt too small. It was like fighting for a single tree in a forest that was being clear-cut. Mark wanted to play a game of assets?
Fine.
I would show him what real assets looked like. The deep sense of crisis settled in as the divorce proceedings began. Mark was brutal. He painted a picture of me as unstable, reliant on my family's wealth, incapable of managing my own affairs. He sought to minimize any settlement, arguing that he was the sole architect of his success, that I had contributed nothing substantial. His lawyers used the chalet sale against me, twisting the narrative, implying I was making false accusations out of spite. The sheer, brazen lies he told, the performance he put on for the court, left me reeling. He was utterly convinced of his own righteousness, his own cleverness. He believed he had won. He believed I was defeated. Meanwhile, Sarah's salon had its grand opening. He was there, front and center, looking every bit the proud investor, the successful businessman. Photos appeared in local papers, on social media. Sarah, beaming, cutting the ribbon with oversized scissors. Mark, smiling beside her, his hand on her back. And in the background of one photo, a subtle plaque near the entrance, funded by Mark's Shell Corporation name, the same name on the chalet sale document. It was a punch to the gut. He wasn't even hiding it anymore.
He was flaunting it.
The legal battle over the chalet stalled. The Shell Corporation's lawyers were experts in obfuscation, tying everything up in knots. The trust lawyers were frustrated. It would take years, they said, maybe. The cost was astronomical. The outcome uncertain. There was serious discussion among the trustees about dropping the fight, about accepting the financial loss and moving on. It was too messy, too public, too draining. The risk to the broader trust assets was too high. This was my deepening crisis. The betrayal had fractured my marriage, alienated me from the man I loved or thought I loved, and ripped away a piece of my identity. Now, it threatened to consume my family's resources and spirit in a protracted, possibly unwinnable legal war. Mark and Sarah were thriving, building their new life on the foundation of my loss. They seemed untouchable, protected by layers of legal maneuvering and his chilling self-belief. I felt utterly powerless, adrift in a sea of legal documents and cold indifference. The mountain felt further away than ever, like a dream I couldn't reach. Then the turning point. It didn't come from a sudden burst of inspiration or a dramatic confrontation. It came from silence. I stopped talking to the lawyers. I stopped attending the trustee meetings. I stopped looking at photos of the salon. I went back to the mountain. Not just to walk the edges of the old property, but to stand at the base, in the bustling village. I watched the skiers, listened to the clatter of the lifts, smelled the hot chocolate and stale popcorn from the concessions. I watched families laughing, children taking lessons, couples holding hands. This place was alive. It was joy, activity, connection. And it was all built on the slopes of this mountain. I spent days there just observing. I learned about the resort's ownership, a large, publicly traded leisure corporation. I learned about its operations, its challenges, its value. I spoke to locals, longtime residents who remembered when my family's land was just part of the wilderness before the resort boom. They knew my family name. They respected it. One evening, sitting alone in a quiet bar overlooking the slopes, I pulled out my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call a trustee. I called my father. He answered, his voice tired. "Are you all right?" he asked.
"I'm on the mountain," I said. A pause.
"The mountain?"
"Yes."
"And I've been thinking. About the chalet. About the trust. About Mark." "What is it, honey?" "He didn't just steal the chalet," I said, my voice low but steady. "He tried to steal the mountain. Or what it represents. He tried to turn something sacred into just another transaction." "He won't get away with it," my father said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not fighting him on his terms is the answer," I said. "Fighting him over a single property is like fighting a brush fire with a teacup. He's playing with Shell corporations and assets."
Fine.
I took a deep breath. This was it. The decision that had been crystallizing inside me for days. "Dad, how much would it cost to buy the entire resort?" Silence on the other end. A very long silence. Then a choked sound. The resort? "Sweetheart, it's massive. A multi-billion-dollar operation." "I know," I said. "But the trust, it's large. Very large. It has significant holdings."
"Could it?"
Another long pause. I could almost hear his mind working, calculating, sifting through the complexities of the family's vast, intricate financial empire. The trust owned land, businesses, investments spread across the globe. It was built on generations of careful management and strategic acquisition. Compared to the trust's total value, even a multi-billion-dollar resort was a significant purchase, yes, but not an impossible one. "It could," he finally said, his voice regaining some of its old strength, tinged with awe and a hint of dawning excitement. "The liquidity, the structure, yes. It is within the realm of possibility. But why?" "He took a piece of the heart of this place," I said, looking out at the silent slopes under the bar lights. "And he thought it was just a transaction. He thought he could quantify everything, own everything with money he stole. I don't want the chalet back just to have the house. I want to own the ground he walks on. I want to show him that some things aren't just assets to be traded. Some things are roots. And when you try to cut someone's roots, you better make sure they don't own the soil. My father understood. He saw not just revenge, but a reclamation. A move that would dwarf Mark's pathetic betrayal, a strategic strike that used the very strength he had underestimated, the enduring power and depth of my family's legacy, the same legacy he had tried to steal from. The fight shifted in that moment. From defense to offense. From reclaiming a house to claiming the mountain. The climax unfolded not in a courtroom, but in a place of public visibility, a place designed for celebration and showcasing success. Mark was being honored at a local business gala. He was receiving an award for entrepreneurial spirit, no doubt for the success of Sarah's salon, which was indeed attracting a lot of attention, thanks to the substantial, questionably acquired funding. Sarah was with him, looking radiant. They were the picture of a successful, modern couple. He gave a speech, polished and confident, talking about vision, risk-taking, and building from nothing. I sat in the audience, quiet, almost invisible. I had arranged to be there. The air in the ballroom was thick with self-congratulation. Mark's speech ended to polite applause. The master of ceremonies stepped back up to the podium, a jovial, well-known figure in the community. He made a few more announcements. Then he cleared his throat. And finally, he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the hushed room, "We have a truly groundbreaking announcement, one that speaks volumes about the vibrant economic future of our region and the enduring legacy of one of our founding families." He paused, building the suspense. My heart hammered against my ribs. Mark was smiling, looking pleased, probably assuming this was some unrelated civic news. Sarah was looking admiringly at him. Earlier today, the MC continued, his voice swelling with importance, a definitive agreement was reached for the acquisition of the entire name of ski resort by a private investment group. A ripple went through the room. Acquisition of the resort? That was big news. Mark's smile faltered slightly, curiosity replacing smugness. Resort acquisitions were complex, multi-billion-dollar deals. He was probably wondering who the players were. This acquisition, the MC went on, represents a significant reinvestment in our community and the future of mountain tourism. And we are particularly pleased to announce the identity of this visionary investment group. Effective immediately, the new owner and operator of Name of Ski Resort is the My Family's Last Name Family Trust. The name hung in the air. My family's name. Followed by Family Trust, the room erupted, but not in immediate applause. In stunned silence. People turned, whispering, looking towards where the prominent members of my family were seated, my father, several trustees. They were nodding, quiet, their faces neutral. And then I looked at Mark. His face was a study in real-time collapse. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty gray. His eyes widened, fixing on the MC, then flickering frantically towards my father, then towards me. The confident posture dissolved. He froze, literally frozen mid-breath. He looked like a statue carved from ice, and the ice was melting, cracking. His jaw slackened. Sarah, beside him, looked utterly bewildered, her smile gone, replaced by confusion. She followed his gaze, her eyes finding mine. The MC continued, oblivious to the seismic shift he'd just unleashed. He talked about plans for revitalization, about the trust's commitment to preserving the mountain's character while investing in its future. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was watching Mark. He tried to recover, to force a smile, to regain his composure. But he couldn't. The sheer, unimaginable scale of the countermove had blindsided him completely. He had thought he was playing chess, taking a pawn the Chalet. He had just realized I'd bought the entire board. His little transaction, his clever loophole, his stolen funds used for a small salon, it was all less than a rounding error compared to the value of the mountain he now stood on, the mountain owned by the family he had tried to steal from. The irony was brutal. He had stolen from the family that now owned the literal ground beneath his feet, the ground where his mistress's salon was located in the resort village. He finally managed to move, a jerky, desperate turn towards me. His eyes pleaded, questioned, accused.
How?
How had I done this? How had we done this? He couldn't grasp it. His world, built on his own perceived cleverness and manipulation, had just been vaporized by a force he hadn't even considered. He had focused so intently on the small piece he was stealing that he failed to see the vast, ancient power that owned the whole landscape. He froze, trapped in the spotlight of his own undoing, the award he'd just received feeling like a ridiculous prop in the face of this monumental shift. He was blindsided, humiliated, utterly defeated not by legal maneuvering on a scale, but by a move so large it wasn't even in his dimension of thought. His scheme was small. Our response was the mountain itself. The aftermath wasn't a swift, clean sweep. It was a slow unwinding. The legal case regarding the chalet became moot. The trust now owned the land the chalet stood on, and everything around it. The Shell Corporation dissolved quietly. Mark's investment in Sarah's salon was exposed as using funds derived from the fraudulent sale of trust property. The legal fallout for him was immense, far beyond just the divorce. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, the charges piled up. His business crumbled under the weight of the investigations. Sarah was caught in the crossfire. Her salon failed without his illicit funding and due to the negative publicity. Their shiny new life, built on theft and betrayal, imploded. The divorce was finalized quickly after that. He had no leverage left. He lost everything he had come into the marriage with and more. The irony was delicious, if cold. He wanted assets? He lost them all. He wanted to be a financial titan? His reputation was destroyed. I visited the mountain again. The air was still cold, but it tasted different now. It tasted like quiet strength. The chalet was still there, the dark windows staring. It wasn't mine to live in, not personally owned by me in the old way. It was now part of the resort's property, likely to be repurposed. And that was okay, because I didn't need the house anymore. I had the mountain. The trust's plans for the resort unfolded. Careful, respectful development. A focus on sustainability, on community involvement. My family's name became synonymous with the mountain in a new way, not just as landowners, but as stewards of a major economic and environmental entity. I became involved, working with the trust, learning the business of the resort. It was a different kind of connection to the mountain than the childhood one, but just as deep, perhaps deeper. It was built on resilience, on taking something broken and making it stronger, larger. The pain of the betrayal lingered, a scar beneath the surface. The marriage was over, irrevocably broken. The man I thought I knew was a stranger, a cautionary tale. There was a sadness in that, a grief for the future I had envisioned, for the trust that was shattered. But mixed with the sadness was a quiet triumph, a sense of having faced the worst kind of betrayal and not just survived, but prevailed on a scale that redefined the game. The mountain stood, immense and indifferent to the human dramas played out on its slopes. But for me, it was no longer just a beautiful backdrop or a stolen memory. It was a testament to the enduring power of legacy, to the fact that some things cannot be quantified or stolen, and to the cold, hard satisfaction of watching someone who thought they held all the cards freeze when they realize you just bought the entire deck. The cold air still bites sometimes, but now it feels like a bracing reminder of strength found in the face of frostbite. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.